This is The Weekly Set, an official podcast of TheTotalScreen.com.
I wish I was the monster you think I am.
You have come here to beseech me?
Can't ask for your soul.
Madness can be a medicine for the modern world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Weekly Set, the official podcast of The Total Screen. I am your host. My name is Tyson, and joining me today, as always, is my partner in crime here at The Total Screen, William Rohrig.
Hello.
Today, we are doing episode 283 of the podcast, which we are recording on November 30th, 2020, and we are going to be talking about The Mandalorian, Season 2, Episode 5, The Jedi. So this is, I think, probably the most anticipated episode of the season by most fans here, because it marks the first appearance, and it's the opening scene, I believe, right? Where we get this character, we usually get things from, Mando's perspective, but this one we got kind of a different perspective.
Yeah, Mando doesn't show up at the beginning of the episode. We actually start with Ahsoka at the beginning of the episode. She's raiding, I guess, some planet. It's
a forest moon, remember? they said on the last one, it's a forest moon, and we kept going, Endor? But it's not.
Oh, that's right, yeah. It's not. This is apparently a forest moon that's under an oppressive dictatorship that Ahsoka is, I guess the dictator of this place has, information Ahsoka is trying to get.
Yes. She keeps saying, where, you're gonna tell me the information, and the person's like, no, and this dictator that's ruling this moon is basically using her people as a human shield virtually against Ahsoka. If you come any closer, we're just gonna start murdering everybody in the village, we're gonna murder all of our own people. You're a decent person as a Jedi, so you won't want us to kill everybody here, would you? That's kind of the mentality that she's using to hold off Ahsoka. But that scene with Ahsoka's debut where she's kind of disappearing in and out of the fog, and you just kind of you'll see long shots where you just see the two lightsabers activate, slice up, and then disappear again.
Yeah.
It's just a cool scene, it's so that's kind of how I always kind of envision Jedi as just being very stealthy and
they almost filmed the first scene like a horror movie.
But from the perspective of the villains.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because like a horror movie, because if you think about Ahsoka, she's unseen, and then most of the times that you see her, it's just you just see a glimpse of her as she kills off another one of the soldiers and then disappears again.
Yeah.
So it's like a horror movie where the monster is running around the people, and then you only see the monster when it performs a kill, and then it just and there's there's also some camera work that reminded me of Sam Raimi, Evil Dead. It zoomed in. There's some shots where they zoom in on some people, and I was yeah. So it was pretty neat. It was a pretty neat introduction to the episode, I thought.
It's kind of what you're talking about. It's kind of similar to there was the episode on season 7 of Game of Thrones where they had the loot train episode where the Lannisters had stolen all of the stuff from House Tyrell. They killed off the grandmother and sacked it, and they were bringing back all the supplies from House Tyrell, and Daenerys attacked with the dragons.
Right.
And that scene was described very much the same way. It's it was done very much from the perspective of the Lannister forces, intentionally to make it holy shit, this is what it means to have dragons in warfare. That these dragons kind of scoop in and just destroy everything, and the terror that people must be feeling on the ground level as that's happening, rather than from the perspective of the dragons taking on the evil Lannister forces, they kind of switch the perspectives to give that that view of what it would be like to face something like that. And that's similar to kind of what you're talking about there with Ahsoka Tano being, she's the proverbial dragon in this sense, She's a skilled, trained Jedi master, and she's just wreaking havoc. As she's getting through, she's unstoppable. There's really nothing they can do, know? The only thing that holds her hand is the fact that what she's after is information. So she can't just like kill everybody and leave or something, because then she won't get the information she needs. And also because the villagers are being used up as like human shields, like I'd mentioned, you know? Those are the only things like holding her back. Like there's no force holding her back. There's no like threat to her. Everybody's below her as far as like power level goes, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Which is a cool scene to play, and I think you kind of have to play it off the way you're describing it. Like, you have to do it like a horror movie. You have to do it from the perspective of these people so that you kind of get their terror of just not knowing where she's going and then just having her pop up behind you and kill you, you know? But, yeah, Ahsoka Tano makes badass debut as a stealthy ninja Jedi, in a foggy forest, as portrayed by Rosario Dawson, which was, I think, pretty much Rosario Dawson for Ahsoka Tano is, she didn't voice the character in Clone Wars, whereas like, Bo-Katan was actually voiced by Katie Sackhoff in the animated, like, shows, you know? It was her, like, it was modeled after her and it was voiced by her. Ahsoka Tano was not based on Rosario Dawson. It wasn't voiced by Rosario Dawson.
That was
but it was But it was the most obvious casting since like, you know, Charles Xavier and X-Men, you know.
Yeah, it's pretty good casting, I thought.
It was the one that everybody immediately said, "Oh, if Ahsoka Tano is going to be in it, she should be played by Rosario Dawson." Like, you know, like that's like it was the one that everybody basically said that's what should happen. Like immediately, in the same way that I remember when X-Men hadn't come out yet and hadn't been cast yet. But we knew it was coming, and everyone's like, well, who should play Wolverine? Who should play Professor X? Who should play Cyclops? You know? And when it came to Professor X, everybody was like Sir Patrick Stewart. Like there was like nobody was bringing up any other names. He was the only name anybody was bringing up. He was the obvious choice. Like, you know, you're going to do Professor X? This is the person that's the obvious one that should play Professor X, you know? And it was so obvious to the point that like when he was cast, it wasn't even like really celebrated. It was just like, well, yeah, of course. That's who it is. That's who it has to be, you know? And this is like, I think almost the closest thing since that, you know, like the other example you could bring up maybe would be like Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, you know, it's like such obvious casting. That's like the second you hear the character is going to be in there, you're like, oh, this person should play them. And then they actually got that person. So it's always cool to kind of see that.
Right, exactly.
This episode itself was like heavily based on, like the works of like Akira Kurosawa and like other like kind of samurai works and stuff. And that makes sense because, you know, the Jedi are basically like mystic samurais, you know, that's kind of how they've always been. But this episode in particular is really close to, Yojimbo. Have you ever seen Yojimbo by Akira Kurosawa?
I have not.
Okay. So you've probably seen stuff based on it. And so I'm going to run down kind of the basic plot idea of Yojimbo, and then you'll see how this fits to this and how it probably fits to other things you've seen. Yojimbo is about like a kind of a wandering masterless samurai, or ronin. He comes into a town and there's like a dispute between two sides in the town. There's like a war. It's kind of almost like, you know, the Montagues and the Capulets, like, you know, where they're like a feuding group within this town. And he gets approached by both sides to kind of like take up arms against the other. And he ends up like siding with kind of like the underdog after like taking the money and the resources and everything of the, like the richer side and right, assuring them that he's working for him. And instead he goes to the other side and works against them. And right, that was like Yojimbo. It's a classic movie. It's probably my favorite of Akira Kurosawa's like samurai films, you know, like everybody knows like the Seven Samurai and stuff, but Yojimbo is probably my personal favorite just because the character is so, which is Toshiro Mifune, who's in like most of Kurosawa's works, but he's so like charming. Like he's such like an interesting character. He's such a lovable rogue. He's like a Han Solo like, you know, type character that you just instantly like. And so that's kind of like a heavy basis for what this is based on. And as I described that trope, probably like a million other movies and stuff probably popped into your mind that did the same thing. Because that's how a lot of Akira Kurosawa stuff works. Like it kind of sets a groundwork and then everybody kind of copies it, including Star Wars in general, which like the original Star Wars was heavily based on like The Hidden Fortress and other like Kurosawa films.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So yeah, so it's like, it's cool to see them do like a really kind of direct kind of copy, but you know, with creative license, so it's fine, of Yojimbo, of the Akira Kurosawa thing, because that's so deeply rooted in what Star Wars is. Like, Star Wars is deeply rooted in the idea of kind of like adapting Kurosawa in a sense. So to have them go back with the Mandalorian to that's something that hasn't really been done that well in Star Wars in like a long time. Like, they've kind of lost that Kurosawa touch, and like the modern movies and stuff have kind of completely lost that. So it's kind of cool to see an aspect of that kind of creep its way back into Star Wars, which, The Mandalorian in general has had a lot of that because, it has that Western aesthetic, which is like also based on Kurosawa films, But yeah, so there's that. And then there's another thing that I read up on as being like a big influence on this episode. And that's, have you ever heard of the manga Lone Wolf and Cub?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And to be honest, I was thinking, I think it's pretty obvious that the entire Mandalorian series is a riff off of Lone Wolf and Cub.
Yes, very much so.
Yes.
But there's a scene in particular in Lone Wolf and Cub in the manga. I don't think it was adapted into any of the movies or anything, but it was in the manga where, the titular wolf character, the samurai, gives a test to the 1-year-old child that he's carrying with him and offers that he can choose either one of these two objects he has. One is like a sword and the other is like a ball. And basically the idea is that if the child chooses the sword, he's going to train the child, to be a samurai, to be a fighter. And if he chooses the ball, he's going to put him out of his misery by killing him. Like, he's going to say this child cannot survive in this world. He doesn't have the heart to be a samurai, so I'll kill him if he chooses that. And he chooses the sword and gets trained and stuff. They kind of did a reverse of that in this scene where Grogu, which is Baby Yoda's name that we now know, is being kind of taught by, or not taught by, but tested by Ahsoka Tano. And she sends him a rock, and then he doesn't send it back. He refuses. He just kind of drops it. But then the one thing he does take is this gear shift knob from the Mandalorian ship that he's been kind of obsessed with. And the idea that they're doing there is that the thing he's attracted to, the thing he's willing to grab for, is the thing that's playful to him rather than the thing that's dangerous, as in a rock being dangerous or something. So they're kind of riffing on that idea, and then that's why, obviously, Ahsoka Tano has no intention of murdering him if he doesn't live up to that, but she, in the same sense, that's kind of like a deciding factor for why she can't really train him, that could be a real deciding factor, that he's not somebody that she can teach the sword to because he chose this instead. In this case, even more so than just choosing something playful, he chose Mando. He chose the companionship of Mando over showing his own abilities, basically.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And like I said, what you said with the scene from Lone Wolf and Cub, they couldn't do it that way because then that means Baby Yoda effectively leaves the show, and they're not gonna do that.
Ahsoka does that, and she's like, "Oh, he didn't choose the lightsaber," and then just murders him on screen.
Yeah, exactly.
And it just says the end. That's just how the series ends.
I mean, the whole thing with but what I meant was Mando wasn't going to end up giving Grogu to Ahsoka and have Ahsoka train him to be a Jedi and then Mando go on his way because they're not going to do the show without Baby Yoda.
Yeah. They kind of had to do that. I think that I didn't expect to see Ahsoka Tano this early. I thought she'd be in the last 2 or 3 episodes of the series, which I guess this is the last 3 episodes of the next 3 weeks, so it's not that far off, but I thought it was going to be he was going to arrive where Ahsoka Tano was, Mando and Baby Yoda, or Grogu, as he's now named, were going to arrive. They were going to meet Ahsoka Tano, and then that tracker that was planted by Moff Gideon was going to come into play, and that was going to start a conflict between the different groups. And I thought it was going to end with Ahsoka Tano realizing the attachment that Baby Yoda has to him, and the fact that she has a dangerous mission to do, so she can't be protecting the child. And then that's how they were going to get around the idea that he'd be returning the the child to the Jedi, and not doing that would be specifically related to that. You know, that's how I thought things were gonna go. The second they showed her this early and in a plot unrelated to Moff Gideon and him showing up made me go, oh, okay, well they're gonna have to find another way now.
Well, they're yeah.
To make it so that Mando and Grogu are not split up.
Yeah, they're gonna have to find, and the way to do that was like, yeah, she basically just like pointed him somewhere else. So it's again, it's the same beats as the rest of the series. Like Mando goes to place, helps person with problem, then gets sent somewhere else. You know? Yeah.
Which is a little frustrating just because the format is so clear, so obvious, you know, it's so surface level that it just becomes frustrating after a while. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's formulaic, but I mean, when it's just so out front and out front and center, it just kind of can be frustrating.
That's the breakdown of pretty much every episode.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know what? It works for the show. I mean, you know, it's funny because like I say that, but then again with like everything else happening in this episode, the episode itself is so entertaining that almost becomes invisible.
Yeah.
Even though like it did not deviate from format. You know?
Well, see, that's the thing is that, like you said, the episode itself was entertaining, so it didn't matter. But that's the pressure that this show is under, is that when they have an episode that's not so great, all of a sudden it becomes painful dealing with that, you know?
Right.
Dealing with that formula ends up becoming like a literal pain for the people watching. Like, oh God, just ditch this fucking format already. Like when it works and it's fine. But when it doesn't work, it's so obvious that it becomes like, you know, obnoxious.
Right. And the thing is like, and the thing like I'm thinking is like I hope they have like an ending planned for this show. I hope that it has like a definitive ending and it's not like they're gonna go on forever, because I was thinking about this episode like brings the whole concept into stark relief that Mando is on a never ending quest to find a place for the child, right? And it's never ending because again, Disney isn't going to have the show without Grogu, without Baby Yoda, you know. And so Mandalorian is going to be, you know, forever traveling around the galaxy, doing stuff, trying to figure out what he's doing with this kid, for eternity. And my hope is like, if there is an ending planned out, then eventually they do get to the point where they find a place for a child and the series can end.
The other thing is that by the character's very nature as like part of Yoda's like race, Grogu is, like we already said, he's over 50 years old.
Yeah, he is.
You know?
I mean,
he's like a baby, but he's over 50.
Yeah, they mentioned
he's
that.
Never gonna like grow up, because that's the other way you can handle a story like this, is that as the series progresses and the child ages and starts reaching closer to being a man, then you can go through those developments and you get to the point where once he self-actualizes, then you're like, okay, the series is done. We've covered the growth of this child into a man. And you can't do that with this show because Mando will be long dead before Grogu is reaching like a maturity level, you know, reaching maturity.
And the main problem here is like, this is what you get when something is part of a corporate brand, or the corporate franchise. When the parent company is selling merchandise based on this character, you know, and the show is doing that well. Mm-hmm. The show is kind of, one of the major problems I see going forward is the show is kind of stuck in this format for as long as it's going to go on.
I saw the funny observation that like every episode this season was like designed for like a Funko Pop.
Yeah.
Like for Baby Yoda, like here's Baby Yoda with the egg in his mouth, and here's Baby Yoda, you know, like it's always like there's like some kind of cute Baby Yoda moment that can be turned into a Funko Pop, like every episode. Like here he'd be like holding his hand open with the knob from Mando's ship, you know.
and so my thing is like, they've been doing a good job with season 2 so far. It's been very enjoyable, but how long can they keep this going and keep this enjoyable and interesting? And you know, I don't know.
I think that's part of why they're keeping things very episodic, and also in doing that, as frustrating as that aspect is, it also kind of leaves an air of mystery because you don't have to explain things.
Right.
And then that keeps the mystery around, so it keeps like that level of like ambiguity that you really wouldn't be able to have if you were doing like good character drama. Because if you were doing good character drama, you'd have to like create tension, resolve tension, do these things, and they're not really doing that,
Right.
And that's like works to their benefit for making this something that can run for a really long time, maybe without getting obnoxious based on how good they can keep the episodes, from season to season and stuff. But one thing that I think they're doing, and they did it all along, even in the first season, but much more so in this season, is the way they're tapping into like the extended universe of Star Wars. Like, we already mentioned Ahsoka Tano in this episode. We mentioned Bo-Katan, who was in like a previous episode. These are characters that were in like Clone Wars and Rebels and stuff. But it's not even just that. Like the information that Ahsoka was looking for turns out to be the location of Grand Admiral Thrawn. This is a character from one of the Star Wars like extended universe books that's now referred to as like Star Wars Legends, I guess.
Right.
They canonized it, then they decanonized it, and then they like semi-recanonized it.
Yeah, apparently like they brought the character back in a new story that's set in canon, so that now
that was in Rebels.
Canon. Yeah, so now the character is in canon again. So because originally when Disney bought Lucasfilm and they decided that they were going to unilaterally just purge everything that came before the acquisition as non-canon except for the films. Mm-hmm. So anything that's not a film, that's not canon anymore. That decanonized Thrawn apparently, and then so like they had to bring him back into the Disney canon.
Mm-hmm.
So which is, I thought the whole thing was stupid for them to like do that in the first, like what was the point?
I think the point is that it gives them leeway because there's so much material that if it's all canon, then like you can't make like changes. Like for example, they were doing the new trilogy in the extended universe books, like Luke has like 2 kids and stuff.
Oh yeah.
They didn't want to do that for the thing, so it can't be canon.
They didn't want to do that for the movie. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's why, because they had ideas for the movies they were doing and stupid.
So they can't use the same
the movies turned out to be shit. So
yeah. but I understand why they're doing it. And then by recanonizing something, they're doing something kind of interesting because they're calling the extended universe Legends. And like Legends, you have these like stories that maybe aren't 100% canon, but now the characters from them are. So that's kind of interesting because you have that, in real life, you have that with like, there are historical figures that find themselves into like literature and stuff. And some of our knowledge of these historical figures or these literary characters is like different from material to material. A great example of this would be like the King Arthur legend, There's like so many different versions of that where like, it's like in one Morgana is Arthur's sister and she's a sorceress, and another one he doesn't have a sister and she's like some other lover or something. There's like all these different versions and so there's no like solid canon. There's just the one, the closest to canon would be the one that's the most commonly accepted, which in the case of like Morgana, like I said, would be that it's his sister, but that's not 100% always going to be the case. They always kind of play around in that. And that's the same thing with like mythology. There's myths that in mythology that contradict other myths and stuff. And so that's kind of what they've turned the extended universe, like books and stuff, what's all been dubbed Legends now into, is they've turned it, it's not that they just completely decanonized it in a way that it's not in any way related anymore. It's like now being kind of treated as like a history that's not necessarily true. Like, like you could imagine some character telling a story and taking creative license, like in a bar in the Star Wars universe. Like they're, I met a man, he did this or something like that. And that man might be an actual character that they bring back into the canon, but like his deeds as reported in the bar might be completely fictitious, even though that's what happened in the books or something, Right. So I think it's kind of like an interesting way of handling it now. Like when they decanonized it, it was kind of like, I could understand the frustration of fans that had been into the extended universe stuff, and just to make like a broad, like, everything's decanonized thing would be like really annoying. But the way they've been recanonizing stuff is actually kind of interesting, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Let me see. Yeah, apparently, Apparently, Thrawn's a pretty interesting villain from the sounds of it. So he's apparently supposed to be like a genius, like a military genius who quickly rose up the ranks of the Empire's military. And he's supposed to be like a pretty formidable villain.
Yeah, I mean, he first appeared in a book in like 1991. So this was like after all of the original trilogy films, but like before even like the remasters came out. Remember like the THX remasters from like the late 90s? So this would be like before that. That's when this character was first introduced and then became like a popular character throughout the extended universe books. And when he was canonized in Rebels, he was turned into one of the main villains of the entire series, along with like Darth Maul and stuff, who they brought back to life and all that. So yeah. So what I'm saying is this means that we're going to have Darth Maul in The Mandalorian, right?
Yeah. Well, they teased Darth Maul at the end of Solo. Sorry, spoilers for Solo. And apparently that's not going anywhere, so why not just put the character in The Mandalorian at this point? They're going
to, they could put him in the Obi-Wan series.
Yeah,
they have history.
They're going to do something with the character. I mean, they've already expressed clear intent. It's just not going to happen in an Obi-Wan sequel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they already had like another member of Darth Maul's race in like that in the first episode of the season of The Mandalorian. Like one of the people that's attacking Mando when he's trying to get information, when he's in that like that illegal fight or whatever where he's watching the fight, like one of the people that like works for the bookie that like has them attack him or whatever is a member of like Darth Maul's race.
Oh, okay, interesting.
That's one of the cool things about The Mandalorian. If you're like a Star Wars geek, which I'm not, so a lot of the information that like we're talking about from Star Wars doesn't come from us like reading the books and stuff. It comes from us like reading articles related to the episode, so we have something to discuss and give context to. But
yes.
Like, so I'm not one of the geeks that's like super into every little minute detail in Star Wars, but
I'm not. Like I said, I'm a pretty casual I only know what I see in like movies and this TV show now. So, like, I haven't read any of the novels surrounding it. I haven't really watched any of the cartoons or any other ancillary. Like, the only things, like, outside are like, video games that I've played. Really, that's about it. Like, I'm not a hardcore Star Wars geek. In fact, like, I'm pretty lukewarm on Star Wars as a whole.
Yeah, especially like the new movies and stuff.
Yeah, especially, the new movies and stuff. I just think, God, there's a lot of cool ideas, but man, do they waste that potential.
Yeah. Definitely. I fall into the same camp as you, but I'm so glad that they've found like a really good balance for introducing all of these like super geeky references in it. I mean, every episode's like loaded with like references and appearances and little sly nods and stuff like that. Like it's just every episode, just from top to bottom is loaded with that stuff. But like as somebody who's not into all the ancillary material and stuff, I can still follow it just fine. I can still enjoy it, you know? So it doesn't like bother me that it's there. It doesn't get in the way. So I think they've done a really good job of how they've handled that, how they've handled all this extra material and stuff.
Yeah, the way they handle it is like, I like with The Mandalorian, like you can watch this. You don't have to know who Ahsoka is beforehand. You don't have to know her entire backstory or anything to watch this episode. You know, you don't need like a crash course.
But it's there if you want it.
It's there if you want it. If you want to learn more about the character, you can go ahead. But like the episode's not ruined if you don't know who she is. You know, the episode isn't saying like the episode isn't like set up so like you need to get like a bunch of different references. Even at the end, which was like a blatant reference to a character, like fans will know. Fans will know who Grand Admiral Thrawn is, but if you don't know, it's okay because you're probably gonna know soon enough.
Well, you understand what a Grand Admiral is, you know?
Yeah.
This is a pretty high up figure in the Empire.
You understand,
that's all you need to know.
Yeah, you understand through the context because she's asking the woman like who her master is.
Yeah.
And she's saying, she brings up Thrawn. If Thrawn's like this woman's master, and if she's the dictator of this moon, then Thrawn must be somebody above her and must be somebody like even worse.
Yeah.
There you go. You get that just from the episode, just from the context. Mandalorian's pretty noob friendly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. But they don't do that by not having content. That's the cool thing, is that they're able to walk that tightrope where they have both all the just loads of references and all that insular stuff that makes it so much better if you're into all that stuff. But at the same time, like, it never feels like, I don't know what's going on. This is getting in the way. Like, you can still just enjoy it for what it is. It doesn't, like, negatively affect that. There's two other kind of things I wanted to kind of bring up about this episode before we close out our discussion this week.
Yeah, okay.
One is some of the guest roles in this episode. We already mentioned Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka Tano. There's also Diana Lee Inosanto, playing Morgan Elsbeth. She's kind of like the dictator leader of this that we've mentioned a few times. She's not really a well-known actress, but she is a, like, well-known, like, martial artist and, like, stunt coordinator. So that led to why that fight scene was so good at the end, you know? So I thought that was kind of interesting because there was a really cool fight scene between Ahsoka Tano and Morgan where she's fighting with like a Vesper spear, or not Vesper. What's it called? What's the metal called? A
Bespar.
Vespar, like that metal spear or whatever that can take lightsaber blows and stuff. It's just a really cool scene. But the other one, I don't know if you caught it, but you know the guy that Mando is facing off against in this one that's like kind of like the general for Morgan Elsbeth, the one alien character that had like the gun on Mando and stuff. You know who I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that face off. That was Michael Biehn.
Yes. I knew I recognized him. I was like,
yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Important figure for geeks in the 80s.
Yeah, like obviously, like this series has had, like, with some exceptions, great casting,
great cameos and stuff, great small roles, guest roles,
yeah, guest roles, like for nerds, you know, like they like literally layered in, like, you know, like obviously Carl Weathers, they had Timothy Oliphant this season. Now they
Katie
have Katie Sackhoff. Yeah, just great. Just like I said, like this show does know how to do fan service.
Yeah, and so Michael Biehn, for anybody who doesn't know, he played Kyle Reese in the original Terminator movie, who ended up being like John Connor's like father from the future. It's a huge part of the lore in all of the Terminator stuff, even though he was only in the first movie. So he played that. He was also in Aliens. He was like a big player in a lot of the really good 80s movies from like James Cameron. He was involved in like a lot of them. So yeah, it's like he's kind of an actor you just don't hear of too much anymore. He's not too ever present, but when he shows up in something like this, where it's like, yeah, this was stunt casting. They cast him particularly because he's like this 80s hero or icon that people will like know.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So that was kind of cool. The other thing I wanted to bring up is like, I thought they did a really good job of this fortress town that's being ruled under this dictatorship that Morgan Elsbeth is running, of like really depicting this town as like a very dark place, you know? The way they had the prisoners kind of up on those energy poles or whatever, where they couldn't move. If they just kind of twitched slightly to the left, they'd get like zapped and stuff. And the way they kind of had that whole setup, and what it really reminded me of is like, there's like a trope in a lot of like JRPGs and stuff where you enter a town and the town's like evil and you have to navigate the town and do your regular stuff in the town. But the whole time you're doing it, there's like pyres where they've been like burning people alive or something. There's always some kind of like horrific element in the background that tells you like, even though you're buying stuff from the people in the shops, even though you're talking to characters in this town, everybody here is horrible, you know? And you get that kind of impression, and it just like the music will fit that. Everything will feel eerie and kind of like just off and stuff. And in this case, I mean, it's not everybody in the town that's horrible. They're like just oppressed, you know, by their current leader. But you get that same kind of like feeling when Mando's like walking through the fortress town. Like they're like, oh yes, our leader wants to talk to you. And they walk him through the town, and you just see like the way like people are just afraid, and the way people are strung up, and just it's like done in a really eerie way that I really enjoyed, like from an atmospheric point of view, you know?
Right.
Which is, you know, one of the things that The Mandalorian as a show is really good at, you know, it's the visual effects and the settings and the, you know, creating a mood with the environments and stuff is something that they've been really good
yeah.
at.
Oh, for sure. Like, it's one of the best parts of the show. Like I said, like, they know how to, to set a mood, like, basically. And like I said, like, wrapping that back around to the beginning, like I said, when they really,
the foggy forest and
the foggy forest, like, they literally set it up like a horror movie at the beginning.
Yeah.
And they went all out with that. And So, like, yeah, they're good at creating a mood.
Yeah, it's really good. It makes it interesting. It's also one of the reasons why I always get annoyed when they go back to Tatooine.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, we've already seen that. Show us something else, you know? But yeah, it's been a really enjoyable episode this time. So, which is funny because last episode was our shortest podcast ever in the entire run of this podcast. As I said, out of 282 episodes, it was by far the shortest episode we've ever had. We just didn't have enough content. There just wasn't enough to talk about.
Yeah, there wasn't all this cool stuff.
Yeah.
There wasn't no name drops of Grand Admiral Thrawn or Ahsoka or anything. It was literally
you had to make do with jokes about Gina Carano being a horrible person.
Gina Carano and Carl. It was literally just Carl Weathers and stormtroopers. Not too much interesting.
Yeah.
Like Carl would note that's not shade at Carl Weathers. He's great, but and I think he did a fantastic job directing the episode too. It's just there wasn't much plot wise there.
They did have another Game of Thrones moment there though, where they had the grip and caught in the back of the scene, kind of like the coffee cup.
We failed to mention that last episode. We could have padded that out with 30 minutes of speculation on who Gene's guy is in the Star Wars universe.
Here's the thing, it's it's funny to joke about that stuff, to make fun when something like that shows up. Some people though get genuinely angry about that. I remember in Game of Thrones where they were like, it's ridiculous with a show with this kind of budget they would let something like that slip. It's and they get so offended by it, and it's like, dude, you probably wouldn't have even noticed if somebody hadn't pointed it out to you.
Right, exactly. It's like, I didn't notice either incident until it was pointed out.
And then it's like, it's there. Yeah. And in both cases, both in that Game of Thrones episode we referred to and in this, they quickly edited and got rid of that stuff. Right. So they've already removed Gene Sky.
And it's
been decanonized.
It's just because in those scenes, that's fun. That happens, but your attention is directed elsewhere. There's a lot of stuff going on in the actual scene, And the same thing applies to everybody who works on it. When you're filming with the camera, you're not paying attention. You can't get the entire frame in your mind. That your mind can't process all of that. You're focusing on the key things, the characters, the things that you're specifically needing to get right in there. That's what you're focusing on. So you don't see that stuff either. When you're editing, it's the same thing. You're so focused on making sure the things that are supposed to be in there are in there that you don't necessarily notice all certain things in the background and stuff. And people are human, stuff happens. It's not like that is happening in every scene in every episode.
For Christ's sake, there's a truck in the background of Braveheart in one of the battle scenes in Braveheart. It's it happens. It's just, this is just how things work. You have a huge production like that, things are gonna slip by. It just happens, especially on a TV show, because they have a limited amount of time in which to film everything and get everything out there. Everything happens at a much quicker pace on TV than it does on film. So it's even more susceptible to a problem like that. But it's not a big deal. People just need to calm down. It's not something to be angry about. Just let it go. You can point it out, joke about it, and then a week later, it'll be mysteriously disappear as Disney goes back and fixes it, But it's not irresponsibility. It's the amount of people working on this and the level of craftsmanship that's put into a production like this. You can't call that into question because some guy managed to appear in the background by accident. It's that doesn't take away from all of the work that the people have done on this. It doesn't make them lazy. It's just things slip by sometimes, especially when a show has to be filmed and done in 2 weeks or something, an episode, you're gonna have shit like that'll happen every so often.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's it for this week's episode of The Mandalorian. We got 3 episodes left in the season, and we will be discussing those week to week going forward. And then after that, I believe we're going to be taking a 2-week break right around the Christmas season. So we're going to finish The Mandalorian before we take our break, and then we're going to come back in early 2021 and jump things off with our best of 2020, which we always do, kind of like a best of the year at the beginning of the next next year. So we'll cover all of that. And, but like I said, 3 more episodes of The Mandalorian to go. All that's left to do is talk about what's coming up in the next couple of weeks. We're recording this on Monday, November 30th. A Love So Beautiful just came out on Netflix. On Wednesday, December 2nd, SEAL Team returns to CBS. On Friday, December 4th, Blue Bloods, MacGyver, and Magnum P.I. all return to CBS. The Hardy Boys debuts on Hulu. A TV series based on the Latin singer Selena, Slayin' Latin singer Selena, will be on Netflix. And Big Mouth returns to Netflix. That's actually something I'm really looking forward to watching. On Sunday, December 6th, Euphoria returns to HBO. Laser Wolf comes to Adult Swim. Power Book 2 Ghost comes to Starz. Shameless to Showtime. And the miniseries Your Honor comes to Showtime as well. On Monday, December 7th, Nurses comes to NBC. On Thursday, December 10th, Alice in Borderland comes to Netflix. On Friday, December 11th, The Mess You Leave Behind comes to Netflix. And on Sunday, December 13th, Pennyworth returns to Epix. That's the one about Batman's butler Alfred in his earlier years.
Yes.
Every time that comes back on, I forgot that it existed for a bit. It's like, oh yeah, they did do a show about Alfred.
I forgot that existed. So yeah. So that just reminded me.
That returns on Epix on December 13th. As I mentioned, we got 3 more episodes of The Mandalorian to cover week to week. That's telling you what our topics for the next 3 podcasts are going to be. But until then, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. You can follow Will. He is at FoxoHero. You can check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, as well as our site, thetotalscreen.com. You can subscribe to the podcast through any major podcast client like iTunes or Pocket Cast, and the entire backlog of our podcast is available on our YouTube channel. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Good night.
Good night.
If you would like to reach out to us and make a comment, send an email to contact@thetotalscreen.com. Stay tuned to The Total Screen for the very best in genre